They know every syllable of every word, which is what I came here to do. You start a song, they finish it. I start the next one, they finish it. I can do that all night. And I'm telling you, man, it's been a long time, for all of us. But anytime I hear Much Too Young to Feel This Damn Old, it just takes me right back to that.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, I love it.
He has sold more than 170 million albums. He built a name so large that even people who never followed country music know exactly who he is. He walked away from all of it voluntarily at the height of his fame, came back on his own terms, and proved he could still fill stadiums well into his 50s. So how does a man like Garth Brooks find himself, at 63, fighting a lawsuit across 2 states, watching a brand new bar get publicly torn apart the week it opened, losing a major chunk of his core fan base over a beer, and reportedly considering leaving the country altogether? This isn't the story of one bad moment. This is several things collapsing at the same time. And the details are worse than most people realized. The lawsuit. Nobody saw coming, and the way he handled it made everything worse. On October 3rd, 2024, a complaint landed in a Los Angeles court that immediately sent shockwaves through the country music world. The woman behind it, identified in court documents only as Jane Roe, had worked as a hairstylist and makeup artist for both Garth Brooks and his wife Trisha Yearwood. She began working for Yearwood in 1999, and Brooks brought her onto his personal team in 2017. By her account, the working relationship shifted quickly once he learned she was going through serious financial difficulties. According to the filing, he used that vulnerability as leverage. The allegations laid out in the complaint are detailed and serious. Roe claims that in 2019, Brooks invited her to travel with him to Los Angeles for a Grammy tribute event. When they arrived, she discovered he had booked a single hotel suite with 1 bed for the 2 of them. She alleges that in that room, Brooks sexually assaulted her. The complaint also describes a separate incident at his home, where she claims he emerged from a shower and forced her hands onto his body while making explicit remarks. The filing covers a pattern of alleged behavior between 2019 and 2024, including sexual harassment, battery, and what her legal team described as a deliberate exploitation of her financial dependence on him. What made the story even more complicated was the timeline of how Brooks responded. Before Roe filed anything publicly, he had already filed his own lawsuit in Mississippi in September of 2024 under the name John Doe. His legal team argued she was attempting to extort him, demanding millions of dollars in exchange for silence. He compared the situation to having a loaded gun pointed at his face, saying that paying any amount would be the same as admitting guilt. He stated clearly that he was incapable of the behavior she described. The legal maneuvering that followed was messy. His team tried to have her California case dismissed and pushed to consolidate everything under the Mississippi court, a state with no anti-SLAPP protections that would have made it much harder for Roe to fight back publicly. Her attorneys called the Mississippi filing a bad faith move designed purely to suppress her ability to speak. A federal judge in California denied Brooks's motion to dismiss in December of 2024, though the case was temporarily stayed pending the outcome in Mississippi. Then, in May of 2025, the Mississippi case was declared moot by a judge, leaving the California case still unresolved. As of early 2026, both parties had requested a trial by jury, meaning this is nowhere near over, and the longer it drags on, the harder it becomes for Brooks to fully move forward. Before any of this, he built something no one in country music had ever built before. To understand the full weight of what is happening to Garth Brooks right now, you need to understand exactly what he constructed over 3 decades. Because very few artists in any genre have come close to the level he reached, and that context makes the current situation significantly more significant. He was born on February 7, 1962, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the youngest child in a blended family. His mother, Colleen, had been a country singer herself with a recording deal at Capitol Records and had appeared on Ozark Jubilee in the 1950s. His father was a draftsman for an oil company. Growing up, the family held weekly talent nights at home where all the children were expected to participate. Brooks learned guitar and banjo as a kid, though his primary focus through high school was athletics. He played football, baseball, and ran track and field, and initially seemed more likely to pursue sports than music. By the time he was performing in small bars and honky-tonks across Oklahoma, the pull toward performing had overtaken everything else. He arrived in Nashville in the 1980s during a period when the city was flooded, with people chasing exactly the same dream. His first trip there in 1985 ended in failure, and he went back to Oklahoma. He enrolled at Oklahoma State University and graduated with a degree in advertising. Then he tried Nashville again in 1987, this time staying. What separated him from the hundreds of other artists who tried and failed wasn't just the quality of his voice or his songwriting. It was the way he performed. While most country acts of that era kept things relatively contained and traditional on stage, Brooks brought something closer to a rock arena experience. He leapt across stages, smashed guitars, used pyrotechnics and elaborate lighting rigs, and generated the kind of kinetic energy that audiences had only seen at rock concerts. Record executives who doubted him discovered quickly that he was not another traditional country act trying to fit in. He was actively rewriting what a country show could look like. His self-titled debut album came out in 1989 and started the climb. No Fences followed in 1990 and became one of the best-selling country albums in history. Then came Ropeen the Wind in 1991, which debuted at #1 simultaneously on both the Billboard Country Chart and the all-genre Billboard 200, a first in music history. The album wasn't a country chart success that crossed over. It hit both peaks at the same time, right out of the gate. The industry genuinely hadn't seen anything like it before. By the mid-1990s, he was filling stadiums that no country act had ever filled before. His Central Park concert in August of 1997 drew an estimated 750,000 to 1 million people, one of the largest concert audiences in American history. He is the only artist in music history to have released 9 albums certified diamond by the Recording Industry Association of America, surpassing the previous record of 6 held by the Beatles. He has won 2 Grammy Awards, 17 American Music Awards, 22 Academy of Country Music Awards, and 10 Country Music Association Awards. He has been inducted into both the Country Music Hall of Fame and the Songwriters Hall of Fame, and became the youngest recipient ever of the Library of Congress Gershwin Prize for Popular Song. Total worldwide album sales exceed 170 million, making him by SoundScan Records the best-selling solo artist in American music history. His net worth as of 2024 was estimated at around $400 million. He was not merely the biggest name in country music, he was one of the most commercially successful recording artists in the history of the entire medium. That is the platform that is now under strain. And the distance between what he built and where things stand right now is what makes this story so striking. The bar he spent 3 years building, and why the opening week became a separate news story. While the lawsuit was detonating in the fall of 2024, a completely separate situation had already created its own public relations damage earlier that year, one that arrived at the worst possible time. On March 7, 2024, Garth Brooks and Trisha Yearwood officially opened Friends in Low Places Bar and Honky Tonk at 411 Broadway in Nashville, right in the middle of the city's famous Lower Broadway entertainment district. The venue was massive by any measure. It spans 54,715 square feet across 4 floors, making it the largest honky-tonk on the entire strip. The first floor was built around a large live music stage. The second floor offered a balcony view of the main stage and more seating. The third floor held event space that businesses had booked years in advance. The fourth floor was an open-air rooftop bar called the Oasis, designed around a beach and tropical theme. There was also a members-only club tucked into the building. Yearwood designed the food menu herself, pulling from her cookbooks and her years of work on Food Network. The bar's concept had been years in the making. Brooks bought the building in 2021 and spent 3 years on the project. He talked about it constantly in interviews, describing in detail the kind of place he wanted to create. He said he wanted the Chick-fil-A of honky-tonks. He wanted people to walk in and immediately feel safe, feel welcomed, and feel like everyone in the room had good manners. He specifically said he wanted to hear classic country coming out of that bar, naming George Strait and Merle Haggard as the sound he was going for. He said he wanted it to feel like a true dive bar, just at a large scale. The entire opening was documented in a docuseries that premiered on Amazon Prime Video the same day the bar opened its doors. The reviews that came back within the first 2 weeks told a sharply different story. Complaints were immediate and spread quickly across Google, Yelp, and social media. Customers described prices that felt steep even by Broadway standards. One reviewer reported paying $37 for 2 drinks, comparing it unfavorably to neighboring bars. An undisclosed entertainment surcharge was appearing on bills without being posted anywhere visible, which generated its own wave of irritation. Some customers reported being unable to pay with cash at the bar, which struck many as particularly incongruous for a venue billing itself as a honky-tonk. The most consistent and loudest complaint, however, was about the music. Multiple reviewers reported that during their visits, the bar was not playing country music at all. One reviewer described hearing the Flo-Rida song low during their visit. Another mentioned Apple Bottom Jeans being played while they were there. Others reported hearing Whitney Houston covers and songs by the Cranberries. One reviewer wrote that the place had no country vibe whatsoever and described it as looking more like a club in New York City than a honky-tonk in Tennessee. These complaints carried particular weight, given that Brooks himself had specifically and repeatedly described wanting to hear classic country playing inside the venue. Not all of the feedback was negative. Some visitors praised the live bands, described the energy as excellent, and said the space itself was impressive. The venue continued to operate and remained one of the largest and most visible establishments on Lower Broadway. But the opening week narrative had already been written by the disappointed reviews, and those negative impressions spread across the internet during the same year the lawsuit broke. For a man who had always staked his reputation on delivering what he promised, the gap between the vision he had described and what some customers found when they walked in was a specific kind of damage that hit his brand in a targeted way. The Bud Light decision that split his fan base in two before any of this started. What a lot of people covering the current situation tend to skip over is the fact that Garth Brooks had already lost a significant portion of his core audience over a separate controversy months before the bar even opened, and well over a year before the lawsuit became public. In June of 2023, Brooks was participating in a panel discussion at the Billboard Country Live event in Nashville when he was asked about his upcoming bar. He mentioned that friends in low places would serve every brand of beer. At the time, Bud Light was in the middle of a massive consumer boycott, driven by conservative fans after the brand had run a promotional partnership with Dylan Mulvaney, a transgender influencer. Other country music artists had made very public statements against serving Bud Light. Kid Rock had filmed himself shooting cases of it with a rifle. John Rich and Travis Tritt had both announced they wouldn't serve it in their venues. The conservative country music fan base had made boycotting Bud Light a cultural and political statement, and many of them expected the biggest name in country music to fall in line. Brooks went the opposite direction. He not only confirmed he would serve Bud Light at his bar, but added a comment that went viral almost immediately. He said that if people wanted to come to his bar, they were welcome, but they needed to come with love. Then he said that if someone couldn't do that, there were plenty of other places on Lower Broadway to go. The internet immediately amplified that comment, as Brooks calling boycotters something significantly less polite, which wasn't quite accurate in context, but spread that way regardless. The reaction from a large portion of his fan base was swift and harsh. People began posting videos of themselves throwing out Garth Brooks albums and merchandise. Some posted photos of trash bins filled with his CDs. Forum posts and social media threads declared lifetime fan relationships over. Comments filled up with the phrase, "Go woke, go broke." A politician from New York publicly announced he was deleting every Brooks song from his music collection. Texas Governor Greg Abbott amplified what turned out to be a parody article claiming Brooks had been booed off a stage, which reflected how agitated the story had made the political right, even if the specific claim was fabricated. Brooks doubled down in a Facebook livestream shortly after. He said diversity and inclusiveness had always been who he was, and that he wasn't changing his position. He framed it as a principled stand and said he believed diversity was the answer to the problems facing the country. For people who agreed with him, it was a rare and courageous moment for a country music star. For the portion of his audience that had been with him since the early 1990s and held deeply conservative values, the Bud Light situation mattered beyond the headlines it generated because it landed directly on the audience that had been the backbone of his career for 30 years. Country music's core listener base in that era leaned heavily conservative, deeply traditional, and was in the middle of one of the most politically charged moments in recent cultural history. Brooks's refusal to align with that audience's position didn't just generate controversy. It reduced the number of people who considered themselves unconditional fans. And that reduction was already in place before the lawsuit arrived, before the bar opened, and before any of the other troubles of 2024 began. The personal toll, the Ireland plan, and what the people closest to him are saying. None of what is described in the headlines captures what the past 18 months have actually looked like for Garth Brooks personally. And the picture that emerges from people in his circle is considerably darker than what his public appearances have suggested. Sources close to him during the height of the legal scrutiny described a man under a level of internal pressure that had no real parallel in his career. Brooks has always been described by people who know him well as someone who reads every headline and feels every criticism deeply, even during years when the criticism was minimal compared to what he was facing in late 2024. The lawsuit hit differently because it wasn't a disagreement about music or business or politics. It was a direct assault on his identity as a person, as a husband, and as someone who had built his entire public brand on being decent, generous, and trustworthy. Reports from people close to him during this period described elevated blood pressure, disrupted sleep, and a shift in the daily habits he had maintained for years. He was said to be relying heavily on comfort foods under the stress, with observable physical changes noted by people around him. The anger reportedly ran alongside the anxiety rather than replacing it. He was described as furious in a way that went beyond frustration, a deep and sustained rage at the situation itself, and at the fact that even a complete legal victory could not undo the reputational damage already caused by months of headlines. Trisha Yearwood became central to his ability to keep functioning during this period. People close to the couple described her as his primary anchor, the person pushing back hardest against the spiral of media pressure, reminding him that his worth wasn't defined by what was being written about him. She stood beside him publicly at every opportunity, including performing alongside him at the state funeral for former President Jimmy Carter at the Washington National Cathedral in January of 2025. She appeared with him at the Opry 100 celebration in March of that year and joined him when her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame was unveiled shortly after. Every public appearance together was a deliberate signal of solidarity, though none of it fully quieted the speculation. What made the Yearwood angle particularly painful was that her name had also been drawn into the lawsuit. Roe's legal team argued in the filings that Yearwood had known about what was allegedly happening and done nothing to stop it. Given that Roe had originally been her employee, the claim placed Yearwood in an extraordinarily difficult position professionally and personally. She had spent decades building one of the most respected reputations in country music and had never been associated with any kind of scandal. Having her name attached to these proceedings, however indirectly, was its own form of damage that ran separately from whatever the courts ultimately decided. Then there was the Ireland story. In conversations with fans during late 2024, Brooks let slip that he and Yearwood had been seriously discussing buying a home in Ireland. He mentioned that Yearwood had fallen head over heels for the country during a tour they had done there together. He said she was pushing hard for the house in Ireland, and that their last trip had sealed it for her. The comment was casual and was framed as a real estate discussion. But in the context of everything happening around him at the time, the detail of two American icons contemplating a significant presence in another country landed differently than it might have in quieter circumstances. A pattern of controversy that goes further back than most people remember. What the current headlines have a tendency to obscure is that this isn't actually the first time Garth Brooks found himself at the center of a serious public controversy. There is a longer pattern here, and understanding it changes the texture of what's happening now. In the late 1990s, Brooks embarked on one of the most publicly ridiculed creative experiments in country music history. He created an entirely fictional alter ego named Chris Gaines, a dark-haired rock musician from Australia with an invented backstory including a traumatic car accident that had supposedly reshaped his career. Brooks released an album under this persona in 1999, titled Garth Brooks in the Life of Chris Gaines, which was meant to serve as a soundtrack to a fictional film he was developing called The Lamb. The movie was never made. The album sold respectably given his existing fan base, but the public reception was baffled at best and mocking at worst. Reviewers couldn't understand what he was doing. Fans felt disoriented. He hosted Saturday Night Live during that period and performed an entire musical set as Gaines without once breaking character or acknowledging that he and Gaines were the same person, which deepened the confusion. The Chris Gaines episode became shorthand in music industry conversations for a major star seriously miscalculating the appetite of their audience. Earlier than that, in 1991, the music video for his song The Thunder Rolls was banned from both TNN and CMT because of violent content. The video depicted domestic abuse and showed Brooks playing the role of a cheating and violent husband. At the time, CMT's position was that the network was in business to entertain, not to promote or condone violence. Brooks defended the video, saying it reflected real life and that people where he came from weren't afraid to discuss difficult realities. He was ultimately vindicated in at least one way, winning the CMA Video of the Year award that same year despite the bans. But the incident demonstrated early that he was willing to generate controversy when he believed he was right, and that willingness would sometimes produce serious friction. In 1993, he was scheduled to perform the national anthem at the Super Bowl. During a dispute with NBC over whether the network would air a music video he wanted promoted in exchange for his performance, Brooks left the stadium 45 minutes before he was due to take the field. NBC scrambled to find a replacement before eventually resolving the standoff. Brooks performed, but his walkout became a talking point in industry circles and reportedly contributed directly to the NFL's decision going forward to require all Super Bowl anthem performances to be pre-recorded rather than live, a policy that continues to this day. There were also years of conflict with the music industry over streaming. Long after the rest of the business had embraced digital distribution and streaming platforms as the primary way audiences consumed music, Brooks held out, keeping his catalog off all streaming services until 2016. His reasoning involved concerns about artist compensation and what he described as the devaluation of recorded music. The effect was that an entire generation of younger music listeners who grew up with Spotify had almost no access to his catalog during some of their most formative listening years. By the time he relented, the cultural moment to capture that demographic had largely passed. Each of these controversies resolved without ending his career. His fan base absorbed most of them, his record-breaking touring continued, and his status as the best-selling solo artist in American music history was never seriously threatened by any single controversy. But the cumulative portrait they paint is of a man who has consistently and genuinely believed he was right in each instance, who has been willing to absorb friction rather than soften his positions, and who has not always read the room accurately when it mattered most. That history doesn't determine guilt or innocence in the current lawsuit. What it does is provide a fuller picture of the person at the center of the current situation, where everything stands right now and why the worst may not be over. By early 2026, Garth Brooks was in a position that no amount of career preparation or experience could have fully readied him for. He was simultaneously managing an unresolved federal lawsuit that contained the most serious allegations ever made against him publicly, the ongoing reputational aftermath of the bar's complicated launch, and a fan base that had already been fractured before any of this began. He was not hiding. He performed at the United States Grand Prix in Austin, Texas, in October of 2025. He appeared at the Opry 100 celebration. He continued his Las Vegas residency into 2024 and made plans for a new round of tour dates in 2026. His approach appeared to be to keep working, keep showing up, and refuse to allow the controversy to become the reason he stopped performing. That's a defensible position, but it also meant that every public appearance carried the weight of every unanswered question that was still circulating. The legal situation specifically has a long road ahead. The California case remains the real battleground now that Brooks's Mississippi effort has effectively ended. Unless a settlement occurs, a federal judge will oversee what happens next, and proceedings were expected to resume in 2025. Both sides have requested jury trials. The discovery process in a federal civil case is extensive and typically generates its own rounds of public filings and media coverage even before a trial date is set. Every procedural development becomes another news cycle. That pattern is likely to continue for some time, regardless of the eventual outcome. The financial picture remains substantial. His net worth is estimated at around $400 million, built over decades of record-breaking touring, album sales, strategic partnerships, and royalties that continue generating income independent of any current activity. A lawsuit, even one this serious, does not threaten his financial foundation in any immediate practical sense. What it threatens is something harder to rebuild, the specific identity he spent 30 years constructing. Brooks had always been positioned in the public mind not just as a successful entertainer, but as a good man, someone whose charitable work through his Teammates for Kids Foundation and other initiatives was genuine, someone who walked away from fame to raise his daughters and came back on his own terms. The lawsuit directly attacks that identity at its foundation, regardless of how it ultimately resolves in court. The industry has been watching carefully and quietly. There have been no dramatic public distancing statements from Nashville. No major award shows have stripped him of past honors. But the conversations happening behind closed doors in the country music business are harder to assess, and the long-term impact on his relationship with the industry he helped build is genuinely uncertain. What is certain is that the accumulation of everything that happened between June of 2023 and early 2026 represents the most sustained and damaging period of public difficulty in his entire career. A political controversy that cost him a meaningful portion of his conservative fan base. A bar opening that generated headlines about broken promises in the week it launched. And a federal lawsuit containing allegations that, pending resolution, will follow every public mention of his name for the foreseeable future. None of these things individually would be enough to significantly alter the legacy of someone with his record. Together, arriving in the compressed time frame they did, they constitute something different. And how he navigates what comes next will define the final chapter of a story that was, for most of its length, one of the most remarkable in American music. What are your thoughts about Garth Brooks? Share with us in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. For more interesting stories like